Good afternoon. So good to see everybody here. I appreciate if everyone settle in. We'd like to get started.
Is it on? It's on. Just bear with it. Zach. Your mic's not on.
If necessary, I'll use the hand mic.
Well, now it is.
Testing.
Okay, yeah. I don't want to hold it. If you would join me, please, and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is to my right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Phones on silent. Ask everyone to put their phones on silent.
People are saying they can't hear. Let me see if I can use this microphone. This microphone's a little better? Okay, I'll try to use this one, if it goes that far. No, I'll just go up there. Thank you. It is heartening to see a full room, so thank you so much for coming out. Is this better? Okay, thanks. My name is Beverly Hahn. I'm chairperson of Montgomery County Democracy for America. My group is one of the organizers of this forum. Who are we? We are the local affiliate of Democracy for America, or DFA, and we are a progressive grassroots group. In this area, we are quite unique because no one else does what we do. Although we do politics and we support worthy candidates, we also do other things such as going to Trenton to petition the Delaware River Basin Commission to impose a moratorium on fracking in the Delaware River. We've also had quite a few events with trying to defend Social Security. Those are the types of things that we do, and we do it at a grassroots level. So if you happen to be interested in those types of things and that stirs you, we invite you to come check us out. We meet every first Thursday of the month at the Jenkintown Library, and the information is on the welcome sheet that everyone got when they signed in. The other organization is the Area 6 Democratic Committee, and that's represented by Marjorie Burlinghoff. And Marjorie, would you stand, please? Okay. If you happen to have seen one of our flyers in a train station or a coffee house or the library, Marjorie put it there. And also, as far as we thought it was very important for us to understand, those of us who live in the 13th Congressional District, what our district comprises, because it has been so gerrymandered. It is not the same district that it was several years ago, and some of you might be surprised at what it looks like. In the back there is an outline map of the district, but that really does not tell you what the district looks like enough because of the fact that the areas have been so chopped up. So what Marjorie did was a phenomenal task. She took a map and she pieced it together so that there is a street map of the 13th Congressional District. I want to tell you, even the congressional offices do not have one of these. And the difficult part was not just putting together the map, but trying to interpret what the boundaries were. The map is in the lobby, so if you want to see street by street, block by block, what the 13th encompasses, please go take a look at it when you leave here. I do want to give some thanks to the Upper Dublin Township and also to Bill Lindy, who is the weekend coordinator. They were so accommodating in allowing us to use the space and whatever our needs were.
Get closer to the mic. Yeah, hold it up in front of you.
We also want to thank Will Bunch, who will be moderating, and the Philadelphia Daily News. I want to explain that a little bit better too, because Will actually was supposed to work today at the Daily News, and if it weren't for the Philadelphia Daily News releasing him today, he could not moderate. So thank you, Philadelphia Daily News. We also want to thank We Act Radio. We Act Radio is live streaming this event. There are people who are sitting at home at their computers right now watching this event in real time. And also what that means is it will be on YouTube, so that when you go home, if you want to show this event to someone who wasn't able to be here, or you want to watch a section and say, I don't recall what the person said exactly, okay, and you want to go back to it, you may do that. Now, on your welcome sheet at the bottom, it tells you where you can go on YouTube to find this event. I also want to say that one of the things I found out with We Act Radio is in the DC area, and they are at 1480 AM. If you happen to be in the DC area or you know someone and who wants to listen to progressive radio, they can do that. However, we can also listen to progressive radio, because if you just type in We Act Radio in your browser, We Act Radio live streams it so that we can have progressive radio no matter where we are in the United States. So please tune in once in a while or often to support progressive radio. Now, I had a number of people ask me about Marjorie Margolies, who is, of course, one of the candidates for this office who is not here today. Her campaign was contacted 3 times and asked whether or not she would like to appear. Her campaign declined. I contacted Marjorie twice personally. She declined another 2 times. So I think after 5 times, it was pretty clear that she and her campaign were not interested in coming to this forum. But it was not obviously because we didn't try to get her here. Now, we wanted to try to make this interactive in that we wanted you to have an opportunity to submit questions to the candidates. So there will be someone who is circulating with index cards, and if you would like to submit a question, if you take a look on the welcome sheet, there are some guidelines. So would you please take a look at the guidelines, and if you'd like to submit a question, Norma Niccolo is going to come around and distribute index cards. So Norma, you can do that. Thank you. I wanted to lay the ground rules for the format of the proceedings. I want to let you know that all matters regarding the order of the candidates, the order in which they are sitting, the order in which their names appeared on the flyers, every instance in which an order was needed. The candidates, the campaigns and I met very early in the process, and the campaigns drew in a lottery situation, so that all of that was determined in advance. The moderator will conduct the questioning and enforce the speaking restrictions. The timekeepers, and we have timekeepers up in the front row here, they will alert the candidates when 1 minute is remaining, 30 seconds remaining, and their time is up. And if they happen to exceed their time by a considerable amount, then a bell will ring. The candidates will be allowed to have an opening statement of 3 minutes. Every question, they will be allowed to speak for 2 minutes, and they will have a closing for 2 minutes. Now I'd like to introduce the candidates. So if the candidates would like to come in, appreciate, thank you. At my far right is Dr. Valerie Arkoosh. In the center is Senator Daylin Leach. And to my near right is Representative Brendan Boyle. Now, those of us who were organizing this event were absolutely thrilled that Will Bunch is going to moderate for us. Will is a journalist whose articles have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Mother Jones, American Prospect, and elsewhere. He's a senior fellow for the progressive media watchdog Media Matters for America. He has won numerous journalism awards, including sharing a Pulitzer Prize for spot news reporting for the New York Newsday. And he is the author of several books, including The Backlash, Right-Wing Radicals, High-Def Hucksters, and Paranoid Politics in the Age of Obama. And he's also written Tear Down This Myth, How the Reagan Legacy Has Distorted Our Politics and Haunts Our Future. Outside of politics, he's written Jukebox America, Down Back Streets and Blue Highways in Search of the Country's Greatest Jukebox. And for those who have Kindle, you can find Will's work. He wrote a Kindle special about the eagle, the legendary eagle, Steve Van Buren, called Give It to Steve. And he also wrote about the Occupy movement called October 1st, 2011, the Battle of the Brooklyn Bridge. Of course, here in the Philadelphia metropolitan area, Will is most known as senior writer at the Philadelphia Daily News and the author of its incisive, witty, and provocative blog, Attytood, which also can be read online at philly.com. And for those of you who would like to follow his tweets on politics and sports and music, you can find him at Muckrack. So please give a hand to Will Bunch. Thank you. I will hand the program over to Will now. Thank you very much.
Bev, is this on? Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
Right in.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, hi. Bev, thanks so much. That was very generous and very kind, and I just can't express how flattered and honored I am to be here, and I'm really excited to have all three of these candidates here and talking about the issues for the 13th Congressional District. So without further ado, because you've already had a lot of information, so we're just going to dive right in. Each of the candidates is going to be giving an opening statement where they'll tell us both a little bit about who they are and also about what the important issues are in their campaign. And move to the different thing. I think we've chosen that Valerie Arkoosh is going to go first, and then Brendan, and then Daylin. So Valerie, could you start with your opening statement? 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me in the back? Yes, all right, great. Well, good afternoon. And thank you so much for coming, and thank you to Montco DFA and Bev Hahn and the Area 6 Dems for putting such hard work and effort into this very important event. And also thank you to Brendan and Daylin for joining me here today. My name is Dr. Val Arkoosh, and I'm running for Congress because I believe our democracy should work for all of us. And it is simply not doing that right now. I have spent most of my career caring for moms, giving birth on the labor floor, and I often spend a great deal of time with many of my patients, listening to their hopes and their dreams. Over the years, their stories have changed dramatically. Too many moms and their families are no longer able to afford to pay their bills, to purchase quality health care, sometimes even to hold on to their homes. They are falling through the cracks. And Washington is so divided and ineffective that far too many of the patients that I care for are struggling on the edges of poverty. This is not the country in which my father grew up. His was a country that invested in himself and in itself. It's what allowed his small business to grow. It's what enabled him to provide for our family, put us through college, and retire with dignity and security. The values that he held, hard work, solidarity, the belief that our communities do better when we all do better, were the values that built a strong middle class and provided for broad economic security for families everywhere. They are the values that led me to study economics in college, inspired me to go on to medical school, and that I brought with me here in 1986 when I moved here to begin my career. They are the values that guided me when, as chair of my department, I took on a multi-million-dollar budget deficit after the Allegheny bankruptcy. Lots of tough choices had to be made, and with lots of teamwork, we turned it around. But rather than celebrate that success, I realized that the problems that we were facing were way beyond my ability to treat them in the exam room. So I made a choice. I went back to school, I got a master's in public health. I quickly found a work with a nonprofit organization that believed that healthcare is a human right. I traveled to Washington to work on healthcare reform, one of the most significant laws to come out of Congress in decades. And from that experience, I learned something very important. With so much work still to be done, we are sending way too many career politicians to Washington who have no interest in solving problems. My background is in finding solutions. That's what doctors do every single day. We work together, we listen, we use evidence, and we solve problems. And that is what I'm here to tell you about today. I look forward to this opportunity, and I hope by the end I will have earned your vote. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Valerie, and now we're going to hear from Brendan Boyle. 3 minutes.
Well, thank you, and can everyone hear me in the back? I know there's some microphone issues. I want to thank DFA for putting this together, and also want to thank Beverly Hahn specifically and the Upper Dublin Democrats, and for Will Bunch for agreeing to moderate. I think events like this are extremely important. They're actually a part of having a healthy, functioning democracy. The opportunity to interact with those who are seeking to represent you in Harrisburg, and in this case in Washington. I just want to take these few minutes to tell you briefly a little bit about who I am, where I stand, and why I'm running for Congress. I'm a first-generation American. My father came to America when he was 19 in search of a better life. He worked at Acme Warehouse for 25 years, and then when the company moved out of the Philadelphia area, laying off thousands of workers, including him, grappled with unemployment for a little while. ultimately landing as a janitor at SEPTA, where he's still working actually right now. My mom was a city school crossing guard. For about 3 decades, she was the crossing guard in the neighborhood where I grew up. Every morning, no matter how cold, she was out there for the kids and for our community. They worked their hearts out to ensure that my brother and I would have every opportunity that they didn't have. Thanks to their hard work, scholarships, and a ton of student loans, I was able to go to college at Notre Dame and then later graduate school at Harvard for my master's degree in public policy. Then I decided to come back home. I wanted to get involved in public policy right here in the community where I grew up. My brother and I decided we would both take on the local corrupt Republican machine that was governing where we live. And fortunately, we both won seats in the state legislature. There in the State House, I've been a consistent advocate for raising the minimum wage and helping all families. I've also been a consistent advocate for reforming the way our government works, pushing a tough new ethics law and introducing fundamental campaign finance reform. I'm proud of the fact that I've been endorsed by over 23 labor unions in this state, almost every union in the state, because of the fact that I've been there as a champion for working families at a time like now when they need it most. My wife is a public school teacher right here in Montgomery County. I have voted to raise funding for public education to historic highs, and I stood up and vocally fought against the Corbett budget that slashed public education by over $1 billion. As far as why I'm running because I genuinely believe the essence of the American dream is at stake. I'm running because it is wrong that in America, the wealthiest 1% have the biggest gap and increase over the other 99% of us in American history. I'm running for Congress because it is wrong that millionaires and billionaires are paying a lower tax rate than cops, firefighters, and teachers. And I'm running for Congress because we need to advocate for Social Security and Medicare, not talking about cutting them. So I look forward to talking about these and the other issues that will come up this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon. Now we'll hear for 3 minutes from Daylin Leach.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay? Good afternoon, everybody, and I would like to join my colleagues in thanking Bev Hahn and the DFA for putting this first of hopefully many events together. For those who don't know me, I was born in Northeast Philadelphia. My mom and dad were married, but my dad left shortly after I was born, and I never met him. My mom and I lived on a small apartment on Kindred Street, and things were generally fine until my grandmother got sick. She had a degenerative neuromuscular disease, and she came to live with us, and there was no one to take care of her. There was no government program to do that. There was no alternative, so she had to quit work to take care of my grandmother, and we had no income coming in. For a long time, we were on public assistance, welfare as they called it. I still remember the day my mother came to me and said that she can no longer afford to take care of me. And so I was put with an agency, and they put me into a series of foster homes. I was with a different family on a different street, going to a different school every few months. I went to 8 elementary schools before I graduated. And the thing that sort of saved me, the thing that gave me an opportunity to eventually have a career as a lawyer, a college professor, and as a small business owner, was the fact that my community invested in me, that people like you and your parents and your grandparents cared enough about what happened to someone like me to invest and make sure there was an infrastructure to help me out and to save me. With great public schools and great public libraries and the sustenance that kept me alive. But beyond that, I went to college on Pell Grants and student loans. I went to law school. I had some success as a lawyer. And I wound up paying back far more in taxes than had been invested in me, which is the entire theory of investment. It's why we invest in people and try to get the most out of them. That has fallen out of fashion in recent years. So when I was elected, I decided that I was going to fight to bring that back into fashion and to fight for people who need help rather than people who don't, who so many people in the legislature wind up fighting for. And so I said to my staff, I want to take on the toughest issues. I don't care if it's popular, I don't care if it's going to get me votes or whatever, I want to take them on. And that's what I've done over the last 12 years. Whether it's education or the environment or marriage equality or civil rights or voting rights, I have taken on the very toughest issues, and I think we've had a great deal of success. If I'm successful and go to Congress, that's what I hope to do, because I'm running for Congress for many reasons. But at the core of it, I think I want to make sure that the opportunities that were available to me are available to the next little boy who finds himself in a difficult set of circumstances and can't quite pull out of it by himself. I feel I owe it to that little boy. I feel we all do. And I'm looking forward to a great debate today. Thank you.
Thanks, Daylin. Now we're going to go to the questioning part of the debate. And just to remind everybody, you're each going to have 2 minutes. So we'll rotate who the question gets asked to. Daylin Leach will be the first one, and then you'll have Brendan will have 2 minutes, and then Valerie will have 2 minutes. So the first question, some of the candidates spoke very articulately in their opening statement about income equality. I know President Obama is going to make that, I believe, a centerpiece of his State of the Union address this week. And with so much wealth in this country concentrated in the top 1%, the question is, how do we, if we support better income distribution, how do we make that into policy? How as a member of Congress, would you plan to attack the issue of income inequality? And Daylin, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much. Income inequality is one of the main issues that I'm focusing on running for Congress. It's important to understand sort of the scope of the problem. First of all, we all want to be rich. I aspire to be rich. The path to that is not entirely clear to me at this moment, but you know, I have no problem with people making money, but there has to be some balance. We can't have a society where a few people have so much and so many people have absolutely nothing. And so there are a number of policies I've proposed. And first of all, you should understand, let me just go through the scope of this for a minute. The average CEO in America used to make 50 times what his average worker made. That's a lot. Now they make 500 times what the average worker makes. The minimum wage, if the minimum wage had kept pace with inflation, it would be $12 an hour. The stock market is near record highs. Wealth inequality, wealth disparity is the highest it's been for 90 years. This is a situation that is growing every day. The average person in the 1%, their income has tripled. And while the average person in the bottom 20% hasn't gone up at all in real dollars in the last 30 years. We need to raise the minimum wage and tie it to inflation, which I proposed. I proposed family and medical leave, mandatory paid family leave. We're one of 3 countries in the world that doesn't have that. Increasing Social Security benefits by actually using a measure of inflation that's based on what seniors actually pay. And I've introduced a student loan reform bill called Pay It Forward, Pay It Back, which is considered the most progressive in the nation. Interest-free student loans paid back as a percentage of your income. So that you can always afford to pay back, and if you're working, you're paying it back, so all the student loans are repaid, but people are not crushed by a mountain of debt when they come out of it. And we have to do things like reinstate the cash assistance, which Governor Corbett eliminated when he came into office. Reinstate things like Adult Basic, which 42,000 people were cut off their health insurance when he came in. There are some basic things we can do to make sure that people at least have an opportunity to get on the first leg of the economic ladder.
Okay, Brandon.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So first, just to understand the scale of the problem, it is an economic fact that the wealthiest 1% in our country are doing better than ever. At the same time, the average middle-class family has actually lost income over the last 10 years. This is the first 10-year period in American history in which average family income in real terms is lower at the end of the 10-year period than it was at the beginning. Can't even say that about the Great Depression. In terms of minimum wage, this is the lowest the minimum wage has been in real terms since Harry Truman was president. So first and foremost, we need to raise the minimum wage, and that's important for 2 reasons. First, obviously, it raises the income of lower income workers, 67% of whom are women, by the way. But it's not just low income workers. If you raise the minimum wage, that also raises the average wage for everyone on the pay scale. That's why so many labor unions always push for raising the minimum wage, even though actually very few of their workers at this point earn a minimum wage. So that's number one that we can do. Number 2, I've introduced legislation that would attack the problem of discrimination against the long-term unemployed. We always focus on the unemployment rate, and that's actually misleading. If we were to look at the unemployment rate plus the underemployment rate, we are at record highs today since the Bureau of Labor Statistics started keeping this statistic in the late 1940s. Attacking the problem of chronic long-term unemployment must be done. I have a bill that would say employers would no longer be allowed to discriminate against those who have been unemployed. Right now, they can actually put in their ads saying if you've been out of work a certain amount of time, do not even apply, we will not consider you. Final point I'll make is this. I was very disturbed 2 weeks ago when I saw on a report on CNN that for the first time in our nation's history, a majority of those in Congress serving are millionaires. I don't think it's a coincidence that the gap between the wealthiest 1% and the other 99% of us is the greatest that it's ever been. At the same time, we're electing a majority of folks who are millionaires.
Thanks. And now we'll hear from Valerie.
The consequences of income inequality are something that I see every day in the people that I take care of. I take care of people from all corners of our community, and I see moms who can no longer afford to buy healthy food. They're struggling to pay the rent, get to their doctor's visits, and even pay for public transportation in many cases. And the impact on their health and well-being is devastating. Right now, here in the 13th Congressional District, we have the third highest unemployment rate of any congressional district in the Commonwealth, and at least 35,000 families are living at below minimum wage salaries. It's an unsustainable situation for our community, and one that I'm deeply committed to improving. I couldn't agree more that we have to raise the minimum wage. President Obama has offered a plan that would take it up to $10.10. And that is considered a living wage here in our community for a single adult. But a living wage for one adult with one child is closer to $19,000 a year. So just raising the minimum wage itself, although very attractive and something I fully support, may not be enough for all families, and that's something we need to really seriously look at. We also have to look at our tax structure that contributes to this enormous income inequality. Both individual income tax rates and corporate tax rates for the highest earners among us are the lowest they've ever been in this country, and to me that is just simply unacceptable. These are going to be incredibly difficult, incredibly partisan fights. And I know from my work in Washington that it is going to take not only a dedicated member of Congress leading this fight, like I would be, but also the help of all of you back here at home. Because it's only together that we can push these major game-changing pieces of legislation like the Fight for the Affordable Care Act through. It's going to take all of us together, and I will be counting on you to be there with me on this fight. Thank you.
Great. Our next question is going to go to you, Brendan, first. And just following up, because obviously I've seen the cards and things you've submitted, and obviously the economy is the #1 issue in this district. So following up on that, I know that this was touched on briefly, but long-term unemployment, as was mentioned, long-term unemployment is the worst in this country now since World War II. Since the Obama administration began, since the economic stimulus, there's been almost nothing done to address the job problem. A lot of that is obviously because of Republican obstructionism in Congress. But assuming you're elected and assuming that there is still a strong Republican presence in Washington, what are you going to do about jobs for these long-term unemployed, and how do you plan to get something actually done, because there's been gridlock on this issue? Thanks.
Well, first point is that what the Tea Party Republicans have done in Washington, D.C. is a real disservice to the whole country in many respects. But this might be one of the worst things they've done. By putting the singular focus and obsession on the deficit, rather than where it should be, the historic high unemployment combined with underemployment in our nation's history. You know, consider this fact, and probably very few people have realized this. The deficit is 50% lower today than it was 4 years ago when President Obama first took office. So why in the world are we focusing on the supposed problem of the deficit when the fact of the matter is we're actually near our historic norm, when at the same time unemployment and underemployment are at such record highs? We should focus on getting this country moving again, on getting people back to work and on raising pay. One very effective way you can do that, besides the things were discussed earlier with raising the minimum wage, something we can do both at the state level and the federal level, is a dramatic investment in our infrastructure. We're the United States. we're not supposed to be falling behind Asia and Europe when it comes to our infrastructure. Here in Pennsylvania, we have more bridges and roads in need of repair than any other state in the country. For those of us who live in the Philadelphia area, obviously we're right in the middle of the Northeast Corridor, the Amtrak corridor. We should have high-speed rail, which would probably help our area more than any other in terms of the return on investment. But these things take government. So I am someone, whether in the state level or down in Washington, has stood up and will continue to stand up to the Tea Party nonsense that demonizes government, when the fact is it's government investment, particularly this time, that's part of the answer, not part of the problem.
Valerie is next.
Long-term unemployment is an extraordinarily difficult problem in our country right now, and we saw a real opportunity pass by our incredibly gridlocked Congress when they passed our most recent budget and left out renewal of long-term unemployment insurance payments. And again, this is the problem in Washington. We have so many people there who are unwilling to actually listen to their constituents and solve the problems that need to be solved. We need to go back to the country that I mentioned earlier, that my dad grew up in, a country that actually invested in itself. My dad served in World War II. When he came out, not only were there a lot of economic investments, but there was the GI Bill and other things that would help people get ahead in this country. And we have just simply lost track of that kind of an attitude. This is the approach that we need to restore, and investing in our country for the long term. I couldn't agree more that we need infrastructure development, and I would make sure that federal dollars came here to target the things that we need most locally. Not only are our roads and bridges crumbling, our schools are falling apart literally all over the 13th Congressional District. We have substantial problems with SEPTA. SEPTA has a very long backlog of infrastructure projects that they would like completed. I see patients who simply can't get to their doctor's appointments because our paratransit system is not large enough to serve all the people that need it, and that then just turns around and affects those folks' health and makes it much more likely that they end up back in the hospital. And one of the things that we could do right here and now in this state is get Governor Corbett to expand Medicaid already. That has been shown by 3 separate outside analyses to create 35 to 45,000 new jobs very quickly because of that investment back into our Commonwealth. That's what I'd like to see happen. Thank you.
I'd like to develop a better microphone moving system. Infrastructure. Let me just pick up on a comment that Val made about the Governor Corbett and expanding Medicaid. You may have read in the paper, he was actually confronted with someone a couple of days ago who said, you know, my brother, I think it was, died at 41 years old of liver failure because he couldn't get a transplant because he did not have health insurance. Can you expand Medicaid? So things like that that happened to my brother won't happen again. Governor Corbett said, no, can't do it. And this goes to a fundamental attitude that I think is shared by a lot of people on the right, that people who are unemployed, people who are poor, people who don't have health care, it's not because of some circumstance, it's not because of the economy, it's because of some moral flaw that they have, some kind of internal fault of their own. And once you have that as a basic premise, it's very difficult to actually engage in improving the lives of Americans. And so I just want to make the point that it's very important to understand that this is an attitudinal issue. In terms of the long-term unemployed, you know, the old economy that we used to have, a lot of that is not coming back. We have to have a new economy, and that's just not going to happen. We have to imagine it, we have to invest in it, we have to plan for it. And one of the things I think we need to be doing in that vein is investing a lot more in green technology, because climate change is becoming an issue we can no longer ignore. Even the right, even today, New York Times article in the last couple of days, even Coca-Cola is getting involved because they're having trouble finding the water to make their products around the world because of climate change and the increase in severity of drought. So we need to invest and do big things. We used to do big things in America, build the Hoover Dam, build the interstate highway system. That was President Eisenhower, a Republican. These days, we've lost our ambition as a country. We need to start investing in things like transportation, investing in infrastructure, as has been discussed, and investing in green technology, which will help solve the problem and put America back to work. hearing?
Some trouble with hearing in the back. So if you'd speak loudly, please. And you know what, maybe if you would share that mic, that seems to be the better mic.
Which one?
Of the one that they're using. So just pass it down.
Oh, okay. Well, that's going to be even. It's going to be even harder.
You want me to pass it all then? And then anyone around the audience who wants it, you can pass it.
Yeah. That's the third hour of debate. Yeah, well, that's a little better. Again, you guys segued a little bit into healthcare, so let's talk about that. We've seen in the last few months, we've seen the rollout of Obamacare. I think even people who support it would admit there's been some glitches. Again, taking into consideration that the Republicans' position on Obamacare, if you're elected to Congress, are there things that Congress can and should be doing to improve the Affordable Care Act and what we have now, and also if the political situation changes anytime in the near future, would you be working for a single payer system or a public option or some variation of a single payer system ultimately in the road that many think would be even an improvement over Obamacare? And Valerie, it starts with you.
Need the mic.
Yeah. Oh God.
Well, Will, I think that calling the rollout just having a few glitches was being awfully generous on your part. Unfortunately, the rollout of the Affordable Care Act, can you, still louder, is that better? Unfortunately, the rollout of the new exchanges, the new healthcare marketplaces for our patients was pretty fraught with disaster. The good news is, though, that it does seem to be slowly getting back on track. And I think the important thing is we can't let the opponents of healthcare reform use this as an excuse to chuck the whole thing, which is what they want to do. And I've been watching this fight play out since I started going to Washington literally the week after President Obama was elected in 2008. It is a moral imperative to me personally that every single individual in this country have access to high quality health care, and I am committed to not resting until we achieve that goal. There are many things that we can do in Congress and need to do, frankly, right away. One is that we need to figure out ways to either get governors to expand Medicaid and whatever it's going to take to make that happen, or we need to create a public option sooner rather than later so that people have ability to purchase insurance that is affordable. My organization and myself personally were very strong advocates of that public option. We still need to do things to make healthcare less expensive for people. I'm not convinced that the insurance exchanges are going to solve the problem of healthcare cost, and we need to continue to work on that. And we need to continue to look at the Medicare prescription drug program, where we absolutely must be negotiating prices with private health insurance companies for medications, which the Bush administration put into statute is forbidden in the current Medicare prescription drug benefit. So these are all things we can work on. I am committed to work on. I will absolutely be a co-sponsor of H.R. 676 if I am elected to college. That's the single payer bill. But until we get there, I want to do everything we can to get people covered.
Well, I've been thinking about healthcare a lot recently because I have a kidney stone. Well, maybe we'll talk offline afterward. But in any event, first of all, I think the rollout of the Affordable Care Act is frankly a tempest in a teapot. If you look at the history of Medicare, Medicaid, Medicare Part D, they all had troubled rollouts. I remember they showed clips of George W. Bush defending the rollout of Medicare Part D. Oh, these are just some computer glitches, they'll be fixed. We can't sort of buy into the Fox News narrative that this is some sort of existential problem with the program. That is simply not true. But putting that aside, I would go further. I think that we need single payer because I have trouble, as I try to think through this, understanding the value added that the insurance industry brings to healthcare, other than profits for the insurance industry. 20% of every healthcare dollar goes off the top to pay insurance industry executives and shareholders. I'd rather that be plowed back into healthcare. And so, you know, look, the reason we don't have that obviously is because there was some issues with some senators, Joe Lieberman and others, who didn't support it. But to me, single payer is an eventuality. It is going to happen. This is a way station on the way to single payer. The reason they want to chuck Obamacare, the right, is because they understand that. They understand, if you look historically, they can demonize a program and people get all panicked about it and they think of death panels or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, once people start getting the program, they don't want to give it back. And so for the Republican nominee in 2016 to run and say, your child is on your health care until he's 26 and you got health care because you have a pre-existing condition which you couldn't get before, I'm going to take that away from you. Mark my words, in 2020 the Republican nominee is going to attack the Democratic nominee for wanting to cut Obamacare. He won't be calling it Obamacare, however. We need single payer.
So just to give an idea of where we stand globally, most industrialized countries, most Western democracies spend approximately 8 to 9% of their GDP on healthcare. Britain, France, Germany, Canada, Japan, some of them have government-run systems, some of them have more of a hybrid. We spend 17% of our GDP. And at the same time, we leave almost 50 million Americans out in the cold getting no health insurance at all. So we spend literally double the money per person as other industrialized countries for far less of a benefit and for lower health outcomes. Now, what is the Republican answer to this? Let's try to eliminate Obamacare. Let's have a 44th vote to defund Obamacare or get rid of it. I can tell you that is not in any way part of the solution, but also let's not forget what the problem was to begin with, which started the conversation of Obamacare. So that's number one. Number two is, I have to say, while I'm generally a supporter of the president's, I was enormously disappointed when this health care reform did not include a public option. I believe that a vigorous public option, in order to be in the pool, to that way keep the private insurers honest, I mean, the Republicans like to talk about how much they love competition. Here's a competition. Let's have the public option compete and let's let consumers decide. Last time I checked, people are pretty happy with their Medicare and pretty happy with their government-run health insurance. In fact, some of the same Tea Party people who are against Obamacare were saying, I'm against it because I don't want the government to get a hold of my Medicare. So I think that it's pretty clear that this is part of an evolution. A final thing that I'll make a point is this. Right now, the government is forbidden from negotiating for lower prices in prescription drugs. I introduced a bill and actually campaigned first for the state legislature on a bill that's similar to what they have in Maine and Illinois that would allow the government to use its bulk purchasing power to lower prescription drug prices. That's a way we could save literally billions of dollars in both our federal and state system and put that back into insuring people.
Thanks. Okay, our next question is going to be Daylin first, and we're going to shift gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about national security. Since 9/11, we've seen just an enormous explosion in surveillance, largely by the National Security Agency, mining people's phone records, their email records, etc. The current incumbent congresswoman in this district, I think, surprised a lot of progressive people by voting against measures to rein in the NSA. So I'd like to know, if you were elected, are you happy with the status quo on domestic surveillance, or would you support or suggest measures to rein it in? Are you happy with the president's response? And I'm going to also add you a lightning round type yes or no question, which is yes or no. Yes or no, is Ed Snowden a hero or a traitor for exposing government secrets?
I'll need a microphone for that.
Yeah. Yes. Well, no, that's part of the challenge. You have to answer without a microphone.
All right, let me answer this quickly because this is a complex area. First of all, Ben Franklin said that people who give up liberty for security wind up losing both, and I agree with that. I've been a member of the American Civil Liberties Union since I was 14 years old. With my wife's permission, we named our first daughter Brennan after my favorite Supreme Court justice. Wanted to name my son Marshall after my second favorite, but we were vetoed on that. But anyway, But Brendan is here today, and so in any event, civil liberties issues are extremely important to me. I think that, look, the president's got a very difficult job. He's got to keep us safe. I understand that. There's no evidence that this FISA collection that he's been doing has been keeping us safe, and two federal judges have now said that after extensive analysis. I would go much further than that. I think there has to be, under the Fourth Amendment, individualized suspicion before anyone can gather information on me, which means that no massive collection of data, no storing of that data. You have to have probable cause, or at least reasonable articulable suspicion before we do that in order to do it. Now let me answer the Snowden question, because my answer is more nuanced and may not be entirely popular with everyone in this room. I think that what Mr. Snowden did, I think the facts that he has revealed are very important that they came out. I am troubled, however, by the idea that every 28-year-old with a security clearance now has unilateral decision-making authority over what secrets should come out. There are certain things we clearly want to keep secret. Nuclear codes, the names of intelligence operatives in the field. We don't want everyone with a security clearance to be able to decide on their own, I don't like that policy, so I'm going to reveal that. I'm troubled by that. I think there has to be a better system, and we have to work towards that. The second thing is Martin Luther King said we have a moral obligation not to follow unjust laws. But he also said what separates this civil disobedience from crime is a willingness to stay and accept the consequences and defend what you've done, not flee to Russia, which I would not have done, and that's where I stand on that.
Actually, following up on that last point of Daylin's, there's a reason why it was called Letter from a Birmingham Jail and not Postcard from Moscow, because King was willing to take the consequences of that civil disobedience. As far as the NSA, and I think many of us can diagnose the problem, I have one specific idea that I think, while not solving the entire program or problem, would actually make progress. Why in the world in a FISA court proceeding is there no public advocate? There's no one who's allowed in there. So I'm sure that many of the wiretaps, imagine if any of us on September 10th had information on the 19 hijackers. In that sort of a situation, I think most of us would warrant wiretapping. I'm sure there have been other situations where there's been wiretapping that simply was not warranted. Having a public advocate in our sort of judicial system to take the other side, I believe would help keep the FISA court honest. And I think that is one specific thing that we can do. This is an issue, by the way, that will never be new. Franklin was quoted a few moments ago. Since the very beginning of our country, we've been dealing with this tension between protecting our security on the one hand and promoting and preserving our liberty on the other. It's always a tension that will be there and finding the right balance. In the post-September 11th era, we understandably went, in my view, too far on the security side. Now time to bring the pendulum back to the center. And the final point on Snowden, I think I probably gave a hint on my response in the very beginning. We don't know yet what Edward Snowden has revealed because he won't stay in the United States and that he won't come back. There's still some 650 pages that apparently were released that we just don't know about. So until we actually have him come back and know what he released, I don't think how we could really make a judgment on that.
As a doctor, I know that at the core of every relationship between a doctor and a patient is privacy and trust that the information, often very sensitive information that's discussed between a doctor and a patient, will stay private. And I think as American citizens, we all have the right to believe that our government is going to handle our data with that same trust and security that we expect from our own physicians or other healthcare providers. This issue is so complicated because the nature of the threats that are facing this country have been evolving so rapidly, and the technology behind them is like nothing we've really ever seen. But despite that, I think that what has happened with NSA is a great example of just a total failure of Congress to do their job, frankly, provide the proper oversight of our intelligence services and insist on appropriate transparency in conducting their business. I think the President has taken some small first steps, all of which are positive, but I don't think that he's gone nearly enough. One of the things that he did actually propose is to have some independent advocates on the FISA courts, but not for every single case. And I would like to see that for every single case. Just because our intelligence communities can grab information, it doesn't mean that they should. And we need to have robust public discussion in this country about what they should be doing, not just about what they can be doing. I think that is squarely the President and Congress's job to make sure that those conversations happen and we get new laws in place to fix that. In terms of Mr. Snowden, I don't really disagree much from my colleagues here. I think, again, it's just emblematic of the failure of our system that he had to break the law to reveal what has clearly come out to be extremely important information. However, the way that he did it is one that's difficult for me to condone, and there should be pathways for people like that to reveal important information.
Great. I wanted to follow up, since we're shifted to national security, we've talked about a lot of areas where there's a lot of consensus between Democrats. Let's talk about an area where there's been some dissension within the Democratic Party, which is how to deal with the situation in Iran and developing a nuclear weapon there. A number of Democrats have signed on with Republicans to want to actually impose stricter sanctions, which would probably run counter to the tentative peace agreement that President Obama has worked out. Would you support this legislation for sanctions, or are you fairly happy with the peace road that's being pursued by President Obama? And I'm going to a quickie follow-up to that. There's a movement sweeping a lot of college campuses in this country to divest university endowment investments in Israel because of the situation with the building settlements in occupied territories. Do you support or oppose that movement? So two-part question there. We're going to start on this one with Brendan.
I'm not going to be very vague in this answer. I think, frankly, the movement to attempt to delegitimize and divest from Israel is a disgrace and anti-Semitic. I think it's as simple as that. The effort that some are making to draw an analogy between 1980s apartheid South Africa and Israel of today is simply offensive. I was in Israel in March. Had a great opportunity to meet a number of business, government, and economic leaders. That country is in a very perilous situation. And I think we need to be realistic. A country literally the size of New Jersey. So while we all want to support the peace process and want it to succeed, I don't see how in the world divesting or boycotting Israel makes any sense. I very much disagreed with and made vocal my disagreement with the recent academic conference. An association that announced its boycott of Israel. I can't believe that they would boycott Israel, but they're okay with all of the other Arab countries around there that are particularly harsh on women and against human rights. So that's as far as Israel. As far as the sanctions issue, I don't think anyone is talking about putting further sanctions today, where the question is, what about 6 months from now? If this process were to fail, then we should have tighter sanctions. I think the fact that we have a sign of a new pragmatic leadership in Tehran is encouraging, but we also have to be careful that we're not naive and not allowing them just to run out the shot clock.
I think that it's critical that Iran be prevented from developing a nuclear bomb, and that we must hold Israel's safety and security up as our highest goal here in this very, very troubled and very volatile Middle East. I am very encouraged to see that the negotiations with Iran seem to be bearing fruit. I believe that there's no question that President Rouhani is actually sitting down to talk, because the sanctions that have been in place have created absolutely devastating consequences for the people of Iran. I do think that we have to give people across the negotiating table some ability to stand up and do the right thing, and I see that that is what the people that are the President and Senator Kerry, as they lessen these sanctions, are doing. They're giving Iran the opportunity to stand up and honor what they've agreed to. My feeling is that if they do not, we need to be ready to not only reinstate the sanctions that have been in place, but we can and should go ahead and consider even stricter sanctions, because I do believe that they are working. But I do see people in Congress right now who want to keep these sanctions going and not stop, and I'm not sure that that's the right strategy right now. What I'm not hearing out of these negotiations is any willingness on Iran's part to actually dismantle the equipment that allows the enrichment of uranium. And that is something that I would like to see in any final agreement. It's going to be very touchy and difficult, but I think that it is something that we need to really push hard for. They can get enriched uranium from other countries. They do not have to enrich it themselves. And that would actually take away their ability to make a bomb, at least in any short period of time. In terms of divestment from Israel, absolutely not. It is a country that has bombs and rockets and guns pointed at it from every direction, and I agree that with Brendan that it's absolutely not the right way to go.
As a young Jewish boy growing up with the name Leach, I got to hear some things that I probably wouldn't have if circumstances were different. And I understand that anti-Semitism is still very much alive in this world. And I know the history that even during the Holocaust, nations turned away Jewish refugees all over, including the United States of America. So I know how important it is for the Jewish people to have a sanctuary and a haven where they can go when things get tough. And I've always been a strong supporter of Israel. I've been to Israel twice, once with Brendan. It wasn't just the two of us, that'd be weird. But I mean, it was It was a wonderful time. Boy, he can drink the Manischewitz, let me tell you. So recently when the ASA came out calling for a boycott of Israel, I mean, think about this. They have not called for a boycott of North Korea or China or Russia. Of all the countries in the world they call for a boycott, it's Israel. As a progressive, this is the most, you know, when you look at, there's 14 countries in the Middle East, depending how you define it. There is one country that respects women's rights, respects human rights, has a democracy, and that's the country we're going to boycott. I wrote a letter that was published across the state, maybe some of you saw it, condemning that and asking universities to withdraw from that organization. A number of universities have since withdrawn, specifically stated that they don't support this boycott. It's crazy. In terms of Iran, I would not, I agree with what's been said, I would not have supported the Menendez bill. I think you negotiate in good faith. That is not negotiating in good faith. That is, I think, largely by people who've decided, and maybe rationally in their minds, that war is the only option. I do not believe war is the only option. I think Iran cannot be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. We have messianic people there who have irrational views of the world. I think that's just a recipe for disaster down the road, but I'm willing to go the extra mile to prevent putting more American boys and girls in harm's way. And so, you know, we're going to let this play out. But if it doesn't work, we can always reinstate the sanctions, but we can't let them get the nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So we're going to shift gears a little bit again, and we're going to talk about energy and the environment. Pennsylvania has been ground zero for the fracking boom in this country. It's certainly created some jobs, a lot of them for folks from Oklahoma, but some of them for people from here in Pennsylvania. On the other hand, there's a lot of water, air pollution, other problems that have been associated with fracking. On the federal level, if you're elected to Congress, would you support a moratorium, or should we go as far as to stop fracking, or should we have a moratorium or go slow until we get it right? Or do you have any ideas for regulation to get it better, or are you happy with the current state of fracking? And just as a quickie add-on to that, yes or no on the Keystone XL pipeline, should we build that or not? And this starts with Valerie. Yes, this starts with Valerie. Sorry.
Daylin's really getting a lot of work out here, isn't he, today? So I'm going to start with a last question first. This is a very simple one for me. I am opposed to the Keystone Pipeline. I was born and raised in Nebraska, and that pipeline goes right by, practically my house. And I know so deeply the importance of that Ogallala aquifer to the irrigation of the farmers in Nebraska who produce a huge amount of the food that we all eat. And any spill could be absolutely catastrophic to their livelihoods and, frankly, our country's breadbasket. So I am opposed to the Keystone Pipeline. I view the struggles that are facing us with energy and the environment right now as the opportunity for our generation's moonshot. If we could figure out how to get somebody to the moon in the 60s, think about what computers were like back in the 60s, surely we can figure out how to use alternative and renewable energy resources to get rid of our dependence on carbon-based fuels in 2014. And I want this to be our next great thing as a country. It's the right thing for our health, it's the right thing for our environment, it's the right thing for our economy, and the right thing for jobs. We could do incredible job creation with this work. When it comes specifically to fracking, I think this is a great example of how Congress just ignores data and facts. They have let fracking go. They enabled the Halliburton loophole, which took the fracking out from under the Clean Water Protections Act. That's the first step, is to get rid of that Halliburton loophole. And then we need to start seriously collecting data. Fracking is probably, almost certainly, releasing methane with extraction. And methane is a 30% higher heat-trapping gas than carbon dioxide. So we may simply be replacing one thing that's bad for something that's worse. These things have to be studied and investigated, and I would make sure that that happens.
Ever since I read Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring as a boy, I've been an adamant environmentalist. When I was elected to both the House and the Senate, I begged to be on the Environmental Resources and Energy Committee, which I was successful at, and I think we've made a real difference there. Let me just speak to fracking specifically. Fracking, here's what I've done. The first thing is I introduced a bill which would establish a moratorium in Pennsylvania on fracking. We have to know certain things. We have to know that it's Thanks, Mom. We have to know that it's environmentally sound. We're building 30,000 wells and cutting the water quality inspectors by a third. Okay, so we're not handling this in an intelligent way. I knew the bill wasn't going to pass because Governor Corbett is a wholly owned subsidiary of the fracking industry. Okay. But it's important that we talk about this. The other bill I introduced was a more esoteric issue, but doctors under the bill, you're not allowed to know what chemicals are being poured into the ground as members of the general public. It's proprietary, even though they're all the same. There's an exception for doctors, but like Val. But if Val wanted to treat a patient, she couldn't know what she was treating the patient for unless she signed a confidentiality agreement, which means she couldn't even tell the patient or fellow doctors or insurance companies. I introduced a bill to get rid of that confidentiality agreement requirement. Governor Corbett, by the way, I've been called, Governor Corbett has said I'm his least favorite senator, which is I'm wrestling with. Governor Corbett said, no, Leach doesn't know what he's talking about. That's not what the bill does. And just 2 weeks ago, the state Supreme Court validated our interpretation of that bill. So that is going to change. In terms of the Keystone Pipeline, I absolutely oppose that. That is one of the most polluting technologies for using fossil fuels. It is exactly the wrong direction that we are going to go in. And according to every reasonable analysis I've seen, it doesn't even create very many jobs. It's not even very good for the economy. What it does is create a lot of profits for the industry, and that's not what should be guiding us.
We can't have a conversation about energy and the environment without mentioning climate change. I stood up last January, actually the day after swearing in. Greg Vitale, a state representative from neighboring Delaware County, a few of us who were part of what we call the Green Caucus, and stood with 12 academics to talk for a Pennsylvania plan to deal with climate change. You might be surprised Governor Corbett was not very enthusiastic about our ideas. You know, we in Pennsylvania are sadly responsible for 1% of all of the world's pollution. That is a shocking statistic that should call all of us for action. But of course we know it's not just a problem in our state, it is a national problem. Now let me say to those, particularly in the Tea Party, who want to deny climate change and want to act as if this is somehow a plot. This is not a projection. It is a fact that the 10 hottest years on record all happened in this century. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that clearly has ramifications not 50 years from now, not 70 years from now, but today. I never thought I would be riding out a hurricane in my house that sits on the border between Philadelphia and Montgomery County, and we'd be without power for 2 days. You even have Republicans in New Jersey and New York conceding that the storm of the century is happening every other year. So we have to start talking about the environment not as some issue over there, but as a health issue and also as an economic issue. And I have 4 other points I wanted to make in 30 seconds, so I'll just very, very quickly say I've been a member of a group called NCEL. I'm a leading member of the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators. We meet a few times a year from the mid-states talking about ways that we can harness new energy and be part of the economic growth of the future. If we're able to do that, we will not only help our environment, we will economically benefit as well. We can't accept the false dichotomy that the Tea Party puts out there, that you either have to choose between economic growth or saving the environment.
Just before we go to the next question, because I know it's important to a lot of people here, could I, Daylin and Brendan, could I get a yes or no from each of you on the Keystone? Oh, you did say no. Okay, I'm sorry. Did you just say okay? Just want to make sure that was in there. Okay. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to try. You've asked some great questions I've seen on the card, so I'm going to move to those. This next question goes to Daylin first. I know it's the question he's been waiting for all night, which is, a lot of people, probably myself included, believe that the war on drugs has been a failure. The U.S. has, it's one of the main reasons the U.S. has the highest, one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. If we're going to end the war on drugs, what are we going to replace it with? What should our policy be? And most importantly, should marijuana be legalized or not?
Boy, you introduced one bill, and let me say this. To me, I introduced the bill which would legalize marijuana about 2 weeks before I knew I was announcing. I knew I was announcing for Congress because I wanted to make a statement and I wanted to put it out there, and so I wanted it to sort of stake my career on the idea that we need to have rational policies, even if it's controversial. The war on drugs is completely irrational. You're taking 25,000 people a year for marijuana, low-grade marijuana offenses in Pennsylvania, otherwise law-abiding citizens, and putting them into the criminal justice system. We're spending $350 million a year to do that, not to mention the $500 million a year we could get in taxes if we had a different policy. We are forcing people to buy, who use marijuana, to buy it from some guy behind a bowling alley where you don't know the potency of it, you don't know if it's laced with something else. No one's ever died from smoking marijuana, but they've died from smoking it when it's been laced with other things. This policy is literally killing people. We're creating a black market which is not enforced by rules and regulations, but is enforced by cartels and violence. Every dollar we put into the hands of a legitimate marijuana person, we take out of the hands of a drug cartel or a gang. And this is a policy which is 75 years old, has not been revisited in that time. Frankly, it is just destroying the minority community, where you're 5 times more likely to get arrested and 4 times more likely to be incarcerated than white folks, even though the rate of use is the same. If we were starting from scratch and we had alcohol and marijuana and we were evaluating them both and we're like, which one do we want to make legal and which one do we make illegal, we would never have the current system. So it's time to revisit that. Governor Corbett, who says he will veto any bill, even a bill that helps sick children, if it comes from marijuana, wants to increase by 10-fold the number of places you can get alcohol in Pennsylvania. It doesn't make any sense. And finally, I just want to say, it's not only recreational but medical marijuana. We're trying to help sick kids with epilepsy. Governor Corbett will not even go along with that, even with a strain that doesn't intoxicate you. It makes my head want to explode.
Well, let me answer this quickly before Daylin's head explodes, and I have to get out of the way. I come to this issue with maybe a bit of a different perspective. I grew up in an inner city neighborhood of Philadelphia where frankly drugs was a serious problem. I have kids that I grew up with who were just as smart as I was and could have gone on to do great things, who unfortunately got involved in the drug culture and ruined their lives. So I don't react cavalierly to this issue and take it quite serious, particularly when we have urban neighborhoods that have been destroyed by drugs. In terms of the marijuana issue specifically, I think of what's something that Thomas Jefferson said over 2 centuries ago, that the states are our laboratories of democracy. We now have Colorado and Washington State that are moving forward in this direction. I don't think it's a bad idea to sit back and see how this works out. Will it actually prove to be more beneficial? Will tax revenue increase? Or will there be such higher social costs that it'll prove to be a mistake? I don't think we have the answers to any of those questions yet, and I think it's okay to sit back and keep an open mind about it. Final thing I'll say this is medicinal marijuana is quite a bit different than the full marijuana legalization push that has been going on. New Jersey, Connecticut, actually many other states have had medicinal marijuana for quite some time. I'm a co-sponsor of that bill. I think it's supported by the overwhelming majority of Pennsylvanians. For those who are sick and actually, particularly cancer patients, for whom the small dose of marijuana would be helpful in their treatment, I think medicinal marijuana is the humane approach.
Our war on drugs in this country has really become a war on our neighborhoods. It has been a total failure. It has wasted a ton of money, and we're really no better off than where we were when we started the war on drugs. The impact on minority communities, on youth, has been unacceptable in my view, and it's devastating to local communities. And it's creating lifelong difficulties with jobs, completing education. The ramifications for nonviolent offenses from small amounts of marijuana, for instance, are unacceptable in my book. So I think first and foremost, mandatory minimums need to go, and they need to be separated from the question of whether or not we legalize marijuana, but they clearly must go. The real issue as I see it, and I see this in my practice with my patients, is we need to solve poverty. We have to create options for career paths that don't include selling drugs as the best possible career path that a young adult is looking at. So from my viewpoint, this is a much bigger problem than what's happening with an individual substance. We have to make sure that people have access to good drug treatment programs. Thankfully, the Affordable Care Act is going to now make that a benefit that pretty much everybody has access to, but we need to make sure those programs are strong and that they work well. So I think there's many steps that we can take here along the way. When it comes to marijuana, though, I support medical marijuana. I think we need to make that legal. There are definitely good science and good data that show that it can be very, very useful in certain conditions. And as we broaden that out, it will also let us collect the information that we need to decide whether or not we should legalize recreational marijuana. I have to tell you as a doctor, it's hard for me to get behind legalizing inhaling any burning substance into your lungs, but I want to be open, I want to see the data, I want to see the evidence, and I think that we can collect that and then make a decision.
Great. Well, now we're going to prove once again that the people are wiser than the media, because we're going to ask some of the questions that you've submitted on cards. Here's one that's a very important issue. I'm glad we're finally getting to this, which is education. The question from the audience is, where do you stand on the Common Core state standards in education? And then additionally, it says all the candidates have said that they support public schools. With that being said, do any of the candidates send their own kids to public schools? And if it's not too much to squeeze in, I'd also like kind of a quick yes or no on whether or not you support the concept of vouchers in education. And I believe this one starts with Brendan. Do you support education? Do you support Common Core? Do you send your kids to public school? And what's your position on vouchers?
And all in 2 minutes. Well, let me say first, My wife is a public school teacher, as I mentioned, here in Montgomery County. We do not have school-age children, so we don't send them to any school yet. My wife and I actually just had a baby 3 weeks ago, so we have a baby girl. So if I look like I haven't slept in 3 weeks, it's because I haven't slept in 3 weeks. I'm very proud of the record that I've had on public education. My first 2 years in the legislature voted for Rendell budgets that actually brought funding and spending for education to historic highs in the Commonwealth. And I stood up and vocally fought against the Corbett budgets that slashed education funding by over $1 billion and that have done a great deal of damage throughout Pennsylvania, particularly in Philadelphia. Now let me also say, and this might not be the most popular thing, I think that for 80 to 90% of our schools and our school districts, things are going really well. I mentioned how my wife teaches in Montgomery County in a great school district. Some of the best school districts in the state are right here in Montgomery County. But we also have to recognize the fact that for the bottom 10%, things are not working. Now the question is, do I support additional options for those parents? Absolutely I do. The public school in the neighborhood where I grew up had a 30% graduation rate. 30%. I don't think it's right for anyone to sit out in the main line and deny further opportunities to those families that they have for themselves.
Oh.
Education is one of the most important things that we have in this country. It is the fundamental and I view right that everybody growing up in this country should have access to a decent education. It's what fuels our innovation and our growth in this country, and it obviously played a very important role in all of us sitting up here at this table today. I believe that we have just dropped the ball entirely in terms of investing in our public education, and that our public education should be as strong as we can possibly make it. I personally went to public schools and am a product of that, and I had teachers who instilled in me the belief that I really could do whatever I wanted to do, even though I was growing up at a time and in a community where there weren't too many women role models for me to follow. But those teachers let me believe that I could grow up and be a doctor. So I am very, very committed to our education. We need to have universal pre-K so that kids are ready to come to school to read. We know if kids are not reading by 3rd grade, their chances of graduating from high school go way down, and they almost certainly will not graduate from college. But we also need to make sure that we are teaching our children to be lifelong learners, not just test takers. And I worry about Common Core and every other set of standardized guidelines. Our technology and our job market is evolving so rapidly. Our students need to learn how to keep up with that so they can continue to be relevant in the job market of the future. And teaching them to take tests is not going to work. They're not going to be prepared and ready. I look at my own children and I try to instill in them, it's not just about memorizing for the test, it's about learning the material. Now, my children do go to a private school, and that was a choice that we're very fortunate to be able to make. My husband went to the same school as did his father, so it was kind of one of these family things, you know how that can go sometimes. And then we're incredibly fortunate that they can go there. But I don't support any program that takes money out of public schools and puts it into other programs. That can be a separate budget item, but the money cannot come from the public school budget.
Well, in case you're getting bored with too much agreement, let's have a little bit of disagreement here on this issue. I am proud to have led the fight against the voucher bill, which I consider the most pernicious bill that we consider the last few years, and I'll tell you why. Under Senate Bill 1, which was the voucher bill, it was the kids who were eligible were the kids who were in failing schools, 144 failing schools. They were also the 144 poorest schools in Pennsylvania. Do you think that's a coincidence? I don't think that's a coincidence. And so the way it worked was a kid left the school and we took whatever we were paying on average per kid for that school and gave it to that kid to take to another school with a voucher. But of course, if it's $10,000 a kid, the school doesn't save $10,000 because the kid left. Most of the costs are fixed, which means all the kids who are left have fewer resources. So if you think the graduation rate is 30% now, it'll be 20% if we institute a voucher program with schools that can cherry pick. Also, the vouchers would not be enough to pay for most people to go to private schools. It was essentially only Catholic schools, which are subsidized by the diocese. This was a transfer of hundreds of millions of dollars from public education to the Catholic Church. It was funded by extreme right-wing groups in Washington who are very open about their desire to eliminate public education entirely, or what they call government schools, okay? And so we have some failing schools, and I agree, we have some failing schools that are not making it. Almost all of them are because of lack of resources. Resources are not a panacea. They don't solve every problem, but they're a conditioned precedent. You can't teach a computer class with no computers. You can't teach any class with 45 or 50 kids in a classroom. So if you really want to fix the graduation of the school, don't take their resources away. That's a death spiral for that school. Fix the public schools. Do what we did under Governor Rendell. Have a funding formula that drives more money out to those schools. When we did that, we had the single biggest increase in academic performance in the nation. That is the answer, not vouchers.
Yeah. Well, since we have a little disagreement, thank God, on that. On that issue, I'm going to give each of you I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond to what Daylin said, and also Valerie, when it gets to you, if you could just be a little bit more explicit on whether you support vouchers is in Senate Bill 1 or not. I'll just do it, Brendan, Daylin, and then Valerie.
Well, first of all, let's be clear. My record on this could not be more clear. I have stood up and voted for every single increase in public education, and I vocally and vehemently disagreed and spoke out against what Governor Corbett has been doing to our public schools. I believe he's dead wrong, and much of the problem that we have, particularly in the Philadelphia School District, has been caused by the budget shortfall. However, if you're asking me, 3 seconds, particularly when I have a single mom coming into my district office crying because the public school where she's going to send her kid is dangerous, am I going to turn my back on that family? No. I want additional resources to them. And frankly, I think it's a little hypocritical for those who sit on the main line and send their kids to wealthy private schools to deny that same opportunity to the urban poor.
So as I was starting to say, as I ran out of time on my prior answer, I'm opposed to any program that takes money out of our public schools. And so I am opposed to vouchers unless there can be a separate budget set up in some way, a separate line item, so that that money does not go with the child. It stays in the school where the child was. If we don't invest in our public schools, one of the most fundamental things that ties us together and unites us as a country will be lost. So I am against it.
If I can respond as someone who sits on the main line, and incidentally, people consider this part of the main line. I don't know what the hostility is to the main line. I think it's a great place. I would also say my children would just as soon not be part of this campaign. They have whatever needs they have, and I address them in the way that's appropriate between me and my wife or as parents. But finally, I would say that the woman that Brendan was talking about who comes in his office crying, the tragedy of vouchers is she won't even be helped. 37 counties don't even have a Catholic school. There's nowhere for her to go, okay? All it is a vehicle to take money out of public schools so you can point to them and say, look, they're failing even worse now. Let's take even more money out of them. And again, that is a death spiral for public education.
Great, thanks for deviating from the format a little bit for that. Now we're going to shift gears dramatically. In fact, you might hear some grinding, but somebody in the audience has a good question, I think, which is just each of you to answer in your own way. If you could accomplish just one thing during your term in office, what would that one thing be? And I believe we are at Valerie. Yes, thanks. Yes. Valerie first.
If I could accomplish just one thing in my term of office, it would be to make sure that everybody in this country has access to high-quality, affordable care, and that we get control of our health care spending. And I will explain why that is. We know so clearly now, in fact, some data just came out last week, that when people have poor health or not enough access to health care, their chances of graduating from high school drop dramatically. And we are now seeing for the first time that people who don't have access to health care have not only a lower graduation rate, lower life expectancy, and these are people that were born in the 90s. So this is not some theoretical thing anymore about, oh, do we need health care? It is having such an incredibly devastating impact in people's lives. And it's one that, you know, this data is no surprise to me, because I can tell you from the patients that I've been taking care of for years, the moms that didn't have access to good prenatal care, not only did it affect them, it affected their child that was about to be born. So this is a cycle that is a multi-generational problem. Similarly, if we don't get control of our healthcare spending, there's just no room left in the budget to spend money on anything else. We spend a higher proportion of our budget in this country on healthcare. And if we can get that back to the level where most countries spend on healthcare, we will have money left over for infrastructure and education and investing in our environment. So it's not only is it a matter of the person in front of us today, our neighbors, our friends, and our family, but it's how we spend our money at the federal level in its entirety. 30%, it's been estimated, of the money that we spend on healthcare in this country right now is unnecessary spending. It's duplicated tests, it's tests that weren't indicated in the first place, it's a test that leads to another unindicated test. We can solve this problem, and I have the expertise to do it.
If I could solve only one problem, it would be a boring, complicated procedural problem. But it is a problem from which all our substantive problems flow, and that is the issue of gerrymandering. Okay, gerrymandering is just destroying our country. I predicted this 10 years ago when I introduced my first gerrymandering bill called The Best in the Nation by Common Cause at the time. Gerrymandering, to give you an idea what gerrymandering looks like, we're having a debate on the 13th Congressional District. We are sitting in the geographical center of the 13th Congressional District. We are not in the 13th Congressional District. There were 90,000 more votes for Democrats than Republicans in the last election in Pennsylvania, but it's 13-5 Republicans. Okay, nationwide, it's 1.5 million more Democrats. When John Boehner says, oh, they elected President Obama, but they elected me as well to keep an eye on him, not true. 1.5 million more people voted for Democrats for Congress than Republican, but they have a 33-seat advantage. We need to win the next congressional election by 7 million votes nationwide to take the majority. Okay, and so what does this mean? This means not only do we have malapportionment, as I've described, but we have the political incentives are what's causing us to govern ourselves from crisis to crisis every 3 months. Because if I am running against a Republican and we're both in 50-50 districts, I have an incentive to look reasonable and accomplish things and negotiate. But if I'm running in a 70% district, my incentive is all I have to worry about is a Tea Party primary opponent or whatever. I have no incentive to reach across the aisle. So we are losing our ability to pass legislation like background checks or immigration reform that even 90% of the American people support. Your election, your vote is being stolen from you. That has to make you mad. There was a room in the Hilton where the Republicans gathered, we were not invited, and they sat with maps and they literally drew everything out of their district that they didn't want and everything they did in to guarantee that they would never lose an election. Our elections are becoming like Soviet elections. If we don't fix this, we are doomed as a democracy.
Well, one thing I hope to get to do in Congress is vote for a Democratic speaker, because frankly, a Democratic majority in the House, along with the Senate, would help on a great number of these issues. If you look at all of the things that I talk about and all of my ideas, whether it's on education, the environment, supporting organized labor, the minimum wage, it is about raising the standard of living for all Americans. If I could achieve one thing, it would be to do that. To finally make real work really pay in America, to finally say that we're not going to continue to cut taxes and support corporate loopholes when at the same time we're not doing anything to help the working poor and the working class and the middle class of this country. Consider this, and this is at the state level, but it's also true at the federal level. We have in Pennsylvania something called the Delaware loophole. We have a corporate income tax. The problem is 75% of our Pennsylvania companies don't actually pay it. They pay zero. Folks, the system right now is rigged. It is rigged for the wealthy special interest. It is rigged for the top 1%. And if I could do anything, it would be to get this country back to where it always has been, where all of us grow together, where the middle 20% and upper 20% and bottom 20% grow in unison, rather than what we've had over the last 12 years, where you have the top 1% richer than ever and the other 99% of us actually losing income.
Oh, okay. Oh, that went by pretty quick. This is a question, I'm glad we're getting to this. It was on the card, it was also on the sheet, and people want to know this about Social Security and Social Security and Medicare, but mainly Social Security. And as was noted here, the candidate who's not in the room, Marjorie Margolies was at a recent meeting of this organization, the Montco DFA, and was asked her position on cuts to Social Security benefits, and she said, quote, "Everything is on the table," unquote. So this is a chance, I guess, for you to respond to that. Certainly there's been some talk recently. Elizabeth Warren and others have said that benefits should be expanded. So let's hear whether you'd like to see benefits for Social Security cut or expanded or maintained the way they are, and if you have a position on the change CPI proposal for Social Security, we'd like to hear that as well. And we are going to start with Daylin on this one. Sorry.
Social Security is many things. It's a program, it's FDR's most, I think, valuable program. It used to be that poverty in this country was a sentence, being a senior in this country was a sentence of being in poverty. Almost 50% of seniors were in poverty before Social Security lifted entire generations out of poverty. And it's also a promise we make to each other and to society. We pay into that system, we have an account, we get that system when we get that when we come out. We have to make the promise meaningful in that it has to be a reasonable standard of living, and there's a number of things we have to do. Number one, this change CPI, and I don't know why every once in a while, and Brendan's gonna have to move again because my head's getting ready to, but every once in a while, President Obama says something that makes my head want to explode, although I support him generally, is that, why he's putting that on the table, it's just a way to cut benefits to save tax dollars for corporations and wealthy people. I don't understand why he would do that. Not only do we need an unchained CPI, we need what they call the eCPI, which is the elderly CPI, which actually monitors what senior citizens spend money on to determine an accurate CPI for keeping Social Security vibrant. The other thing we have to do to fund all of this, we have to remove the cap. We have a cap of $113,000 on the FICA tax, which means that someone making $50 million a year is paying a much lower rate than someone making $50,000 a year. It's unfair, and we need to do, and I agree with Elizabeth Warren on this, we need to increase the benefits for Social Security. The eCPI is one way to do it. Another way that I and some others are talking about is if you remove the cap, or at least lifted it to a more reasonable amount, $300,000 or $400,000, you could actually make a lump sum payments to Social Security beneficiaries when they retire, which would help them clear up bills, help them start their retirement in a way that makes sense, especially considering private pensions are going away. More and more people are relying on Social Security as their only means of income. We have to make it meaningful.
Is it Val? Oh. I have to say I completely disagree respectfully with Mrs. Margolies on this point. And frankly, this is probably the biggest disagreement between the two of us. Before Social Security was created, and Daylin alluded to this moments ago, the poverty rate among seniors was 46%. Today, after Social Security, it's 6%. Social Security has been one of the most successful anti-poverty programs in the history of the American government, and frankly, as Democrats, is one of the greatest achievements of the Democratic Party. Now, Republicans fought against the creation of Social Security, they fought against it tooth and nail, and now 75, 80 years later, they say, well, all right, looks like we're not going to succeed in stripping it away. I know what we'll say. We'll say, no, we want to save Social Security, but the way to save it is to slash benefits and raise the retirement age for seniors. It is disingenuous and it is not true. In 1994, there were two folks who were pushing this plan to raise the retirement age to 70. One was Mrs. Margolies, the other was Rick Santorum. The next member of Congress from this district should be an advocate for Social Security, not for cutting benefits. And if the question is, okay, well, what's your plan? Because admittedly, in the year 2041, we do have a projected deficit. You do one thing, you lift the FICA cap back to its historic norm of 90%. If you do that, you will actually eliminate any projected deficit in Social Security from the year 2041 to almost the year 2100. That's the path we should take, not cutting Social Security.
Social Security is something that is a promise to our seniors, which I intend to fully honor. As you've heard, it has absolutely been one of the most important anti-poverty programs for our seniors, and together with Medicare has enabled so many seniors to retire with some security and some dignity. The average Social Security benefit here in the 13th Congressional District is around $14,000 a year. So it's modest. And if you remember when we were talking about minimum wage earlier, that's about the living wage for a single person, but not anyone with any type of dependence. So we're on the edge right now, and the last thing that we should do is cut Social Security. I agree that we should not be using the chain CPI. We should, and Daylin and I will agree on this, be using the chain CPIE. And what's so important about that measure is that that takes into account the money that seniors spend on health care, which of course is a much bigger portion of their spending than it is when they're younger. You know, when my dad grew up, he was in a business that had defined pensions. And so many of our businesses had that. And we've seen over and over again that even with our friends in labor, they have had to forego that at the negotiating table because other things like the price of health care has gone up so high. And this has just been, in my view, an unacceptable trade-off. So we have to make sure that that promise of Social Security is there. We have to measure the benefit properly by using a formula that actually takes into account what seniors spend money on. And I am 100% behind raising the cap so that we can fund Social Security well into the future, into perpetuity.
Actually, all I have to say is that it's time for closing statements. We left a lot on table for your future debates. So, and you're each going to get 2 minutes for a closing statement. And the order is going, which was predetermined, is going to be, Leach, and then Leach, Boyle, and Arkoosh, as it says here. So, Daylin, you go first.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you for being here today. I hope you found it enlightening and enjoyable. We good? I remember when I first heard that Allison was not running for re-election, and you know, some people talked to me about running for this seat, and I sat down and I thought, am I the right person? Should I do this? Is this right for me? And how do you even evaluate such a thing? And so I sat down and I thought, well, who would I want if I were voting for Congress, if I were not running? What would I be looking for? Well, first, the person would have to be progressive. That's a given. They'd have to believe that government can help make people's lives better. They would have to believe that we all have a shot at the American dream, no matter what our race, creed, ethnicity, sexual orientation was, whatever. I mean, that would be a given. I would also want them to have a record, a substantial record. So I knew that being a liberal was not something that was a talking point or something they said in the context of a democratic debate. It doesn't take a genius to do that. Anyone could do that. I'd want to see a record that showed to me that someone was a liberal in their bones, that they believed it with every fiber of their being. And then I'd want something more than that. I would want some, if it was available, some evidence that the person had some creativity, that they had some boldness, that they had some spark, that they were willing to take on tough issues, that they were willing to do it in a thoughtful but creative and interesting way. Because if we found that, that would really be rare in Congress. That would really be special. And I'm here today because I believe that I am that person. And if you believe that that is the correct criteria for analyzing who you should support for Congress, and I meet that criteria, I ask for your help in this race. Thank you so much.
I want to thank those who worked so hard to put this together, Bev and our moderator and all the event staff. I also want to thank 2 of my 3 opponents for agreeing to I actually, I meant that sincerely, but I guess it came out a different way. So I'd like to thank Daylin and Val for agreeing to participate in this, because as I said from the very beginning, I believe this is what democracy is all about. I wouldn't have been the first Democrat ever elected to my state house district if it wasn't for knocking on every single door in the district, and it was to do exactly this. People that are supposing to stand up to represent them, making sure they truly do represent the people. In terms of a closing, and there are so many issues that we spoke about and important ones that we didn't get to, I'll just bring it back for me to what I said in the very beginning, frankly. This campaign for me is about having someone in Congress who will fight to restore the American dream. The reason why millions of immigrants, including my father, came to America was the belief that if you worked hard, played by the rules, you would have opportunities and your children would have even greater opportunities than you had. I believe right now in America that is at stake. President Obama just a few weeks ago called the lack of social mobility and income inequality the central issues of our time. I look forward to going to Washington to be someone to solve that problem and ensure that the American dream survives for the next generation. Thank you.
I want to also thank all the organizers and all of you for being here today at this very, very important event. And I want to thank my colleagues here at the table. And I just want to remind all of us that whoever wins this primary, the most important thing is that we get a good progressive Democrat into this seat to represent all of us in Washington. I bring a very different background than my colleagues do here at the table. I believe that change most often comes from the outside. And I saw so clearly when I was working on the Affordable Care Act in Washington how that was really the case. What it took to get that major piece of legislation through our partisan gridlock Congress was dedicated people inside of Washington working on the policy, and people like all of you outside of Washington who were fighting for change. I work closely with labor and faith groups and nonprofits all over the country and here in the Commonwealth, and we just never gave up. As a physician, I took an oath, and that oath said that I would always put my patients first. And I hope that you've heard today how I have honored that oath throughout my career. And if I am your elected representative to Congress, that oath transfers to each and every one of you. You will be my first and foremost priority. It is you that I will listen to, not special interests or a long list of people that I owe political favors to. It's because you will have elected me, and someone who is not a career politician, to bring my perspective of caring for people in our community for over 25 years, my policy expertise in solving problems, to the table in Washington for you, to take on what are some of the biggest issues in our country right now. So I'm honored to be here today, and I also want you to know that you have a unique decision in this race. We can continue to support the incredible work that Daylin and Brendan have done in Harrisburg, and you can elect me to represent you in Washington. And I promise I will have their back, and I know I look forward to working with them. Thank you very much.
I think one of the things that we saw today was that we are very fortunate here in Montgomery County and Philadelphia because we have a wealth of riches here. It doesn't matter who wins. it will be a competent person. So thank you so much for all the candidates. Please also give a hand for Will Bunch for moderating our forum. I also want to thank all of you. We have a full house here. It just gladdens those of us who did the organizing that you came out today. Thank you so much for being engaged and spending your time here to find out more about who our choice will be. And it is an important choice because depending on whom we choose, this person might be our representative for years. So thank you so much for coming out. Now, if you want more information about the candidates, each of them will have a table outside in the lobby, and also they will each have sign-up sheets so that if you wanted to get more involved in their campaigns. So thank you so much again. Have a good afternoon.